Welcome to the Podcast Discovery Show, the podcast that's about other podcasts, where every single week we have a book club style discussion about a podcast we recommended the week before. And at the end of this episode, we're going to recommend a brand new show, and we're going to listen to that one, and we'll talk about that one next week. I'm Kirk.
And I am Zach. And this week we're talking about a show called You're Wrong About. And each week two reporters actually break down a topic that you think you know a lot about, but actually there's a lot of stuff you didn't know about. And the episode that we're covering is called Coco the Gorilla. Probably, I think it's fair to say, the most famous gorilla.
Did you know a lot about Coco the Gorilla? I did not know a lot about it.
I didn't know a lot about all of it.
Tangentially knew a lot about it.
You know, I've seen the video with Coco and Mr. Rogers, and I've seen the video with Coco and Robin Williams, and then I heard about the sign language. But no, I didn't know a ton about. I know a lot more now.
Yeah, I do know a lot more now as well. And I did know a little bit about some of the, ins and outs now looking back at I didn't know that it was all the same gorilla. I think that's what happened is like there was multiple different stories. I didn't know it was one gorilla. But first of all, talking about the show, it's funny that you brought this show because I've listened to this show as well, and I wanted to bring it. I hadn't found the exact episode that I wanted to recommend yet. And I'm glad that you found one. And this is a great one. There's so much to talk about. Like literally,
there is.
Go listen to this episode because there seriously is some stuff that we're going to miss because there was a lot to talk about. Like,
yeah, and that is one of the favorite
deep
things.
Too. Like, it's not just like shallow, talking about a gorilla. It got deep.
It's one of my favorite things about how we have formatted our show is we always hope to be a companion piece. We hope to be the book club for podcasts, not listen to us instead of them. We would love for people to check out You're Wrong About because it was. I had a great time listening to it, and I learned a ton about Coco.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's hosted by Michael Hobbs and Sarah Marshall. Mike, he's a writer for the Huffington Post, and Sarah is a writer as well. She's been featured. She does a bunch of different pieces, and she's been featured in The Believer, BuzzFeed, The Baffler, and a few more really interesting websites that do a lot of stuff like that. And mainly in the genre of like true crime type stuff.
Yeah, it sounded like it.
I looked at some of her things that she'd done. And she's writing a piece right now. She's technically doing research for a book that she's going to write on the Satanic Panic back from like
so good.
Like was it the 80s?
I think it was the 80s because it was like D&D.
Yeah, it's
everybody was freaking out about D&D.
There's a podcast that I started listening to because it was true crime. I think it was a Wondery podcast, and it was about this. I couldn't do it, man. It was real dark because of so much stuff that went on. It was crazy. Like
that makes me even more curious.
I did not realize how crazy that whole thing got. Anyway, that's not what the subject is this week. But maybe one day we'll talk about it because it is fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's crazy to me that became like a whole thing. Is like Satanism taking over the kids. It's really a pretty crazy concept and a crazy type of things to get into.
Yeah, I forget what the name of the show was. I'll look it up. But literally, it was about a son turned in his dad for being a warlock or something and like doing all these horrible things, and he never even did it. It was literally like brainwash the kid from TV and things and panic, and that's what became. And it's a crazy story. But so this is not about that. This is about Coco the Gorilla. And I will say they started talking about women in primatology, and I had never thought about it. It's just one of those things. But when I think of the study of gorillas, I think of women. I think of Jane Goodall.
Yeah, Jane Goodall exclusively for me.
That's the one that I think of. Yeah, I grew up. I mean, that's what I grew up seeing on like, I don't know, probably like Sesame Street. And I remember watching National Geographic and stuff like that as a kid. And she was the jam, early 90s. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. No, she was very famous and rightfully so. She did a lot of crazy work. I'll never forget that. There's that video of her they released a chimp and it came back and gave her one last hug before it ran off into the jungle.
That's it's just so cute. But yeah, and first of all, I love their humor. It's very dry. It's very sarcastic. Like it's the most sarcastic humor. It's a little bit dark in a lot of ways. But it's great.
It really is funny. But they, like you said, they do get into deep topics throughout. So it's not a one note show at all. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There's a lot of stuff to like.
Yeah, I guess they talked about Reading Rainbow and Mr. Rogers, and I guess that's probably I watched all those things when I was a kid, so I probably saw this stinking gorilla on all those shows.
I think it became like a thing, but I think it became a thing, like a big thing, right before it would have hit like our consciousness.
Yeah, we maybe saw it in reruns.
Yeah, it was right before we wouldn't have grown up like this, where we were all constantly aware of Coco the Gorilla. It would be our equivalent would be Air Bud.
Come on.
That's what is that?
Ours would have been Shamu.
That's worse. That's worse
it's not
than Air
better,
Bud.
But it's a real animal.
Air Bud's a real animal. Okay, that's not CGI.
You know what I mean? It's a
Kirk
garbage
thinks Air Bud is fake.
Fake news.
Air Bud 100% can dunk. I saw it with my own eyes.
I think they're still making those movies.
I think they are. Like 47 Air Buds later.
But so they talk about Coco's relationship with the trainer Penny, and
to me,
also
that's the story in this one.
Right?
To me, that's the craziest part.
Yeah. They had very, very strong bond. Like, so I don't know, you could tell like they really cared about each other. It seemed like both of them,
Yeah.
And when they talked about all the things that Coco could do, like the words that she'd made up, or, like two words put together, like, and the apes being able to, they said she could rhyme and all these other things.
They said she liked rhymes. Like first, her kitten. Her kitten was named All Ball, and they said that's because she liked rhymes.
So that's the way it started. They talk about all the things that Coco could do, and other gorillas. They talk about Wachu was another gorilla that was able to do stuff. He's the one that did the water bird. He saw a duck, and he made a word up. He made two words, which is genius. If this is the way it worked, then water bird. It's a bird on the water. So
yeah,
it kind of blew my mind. I'm not going to lie. Halfway through this episode, I'm like, mind blown. That's amazing. They did talk about how Coco could lie. I thought that was fascinating. That was hilarious.
Coco lying was great. She broke a sink, right?
It was something like that. She
broke like a sink in her bathroom, and they said, "What happened to the sink?" And she pointed at someone else.
She's like, "No, he did it." That was great. And then they talk a little bit about Coco's fixation with nipples.
They do talk about that, and that comes up again. But yeah, apparently Coco would request to see nipples whenever she was around them. And
this is one of those things that I remember seeing in an article, and I didn't know it was Coco. I didn't know it was this same gorilla. I just remember hearing about, famous gorilla loves nipples. It's like,
famous gorilla loves nipples, and you didn't know who it was. You're like, I don't know. It could be any gorilla. King Kong.
So like all these celebrities would like come see Coco because this gorilla could sign language, and it would always like want to see their nipples.
I wasn't really prepared for that part of the story when they started talking about.
I'd heard like a quote from not this episode, but another that when we talked about it, probably on the other Discovery show. It was like, this animal has seen more nipples than anybody in Hollywood's ever seen of celebrities or something like that.
And okay, here's the complicated part of all of this. The theory originally was that, and there's also a layer of sadness here, because this was a gorilla that was taken from the wild and was never around another gorilla. They even said towards the end of this episode that there's a chance she wasn't aware that she was a gorilla because she had always been around humans. She had never been kind of in a natural environment. She'd never been around other gorillas. And so there's that. But one of the things that was a theory beforehand, and we'll get into kind of where this all changes, but the theory beforehand was she wasn't ever around her mother. She was essentially like nursed by handlers and by humans. Mm-hmm. And so they thought there might be some kind of a nipple fixation because of that, because she missed that part of her youngness, her childhood. Is there, I guess it's childhood for an ape still. I don't know. But that was the theory. But yeah, they get into that, but then they start getting into maybe we should look at what's happening with a different lens with Coco. And that's when this show, to me, like got crazy interesting, because it just keeps going deeper and deeper. So first of all, there was someone named, what was his name? Herb Terrace. Herb Terrace was like, Coco cannot actually speak to you. Coco is essentially sitting down for a treat. You have put her in a situation where when she responds to you in the way you want her to, you give her something. It's a treat reward situation. And Coco doesn't speak on the level of like humans, and then they also got into the anatomy of it, where apes physically cannot speak like humans.
Yeah, they talked about how that's where the mind, the idea for sign language came from, was, they can't actually speak. They won't be able to speak like a human because of their, what was it?
Well, their vocal cords, and they can't control their breathing. One thing they just dropped in here all willy-nilly and didn't say anything else about it, but was crazy, is that humans apparently are able to subconsciously calculate how long you need to be able to hold your breath for that sentence and take that much breath. And apes can't do that. So it makes like conversation not something that apes can do. And so there's a lot of literal physical restrictions on apes being able to speak actual English. Even though there was one of these, they talked about a bunch of different experiments that people were running. Mm-hmm. This was like a thing at the time, where there was all these experiments with trying to get apes to...
Oh, this was a thing, it seems like, in the late 80s.
Yeah, and it's just wild. But they had one experiment that was canceled quickly, obviously. But they had one experiment where literally they adopted a young chimp and they raised it the exact same way as they raised their child. So they had a toddler and a young chimp, and they tried to raise them simultaneously as if there was no difference, to see if that would make the chimp more human-like. But what it ended up doing is making the human more monkey-like, and then it was done. They were like, okay, our kid's starting to act like a chimpanzee, so we're going to need to bail on this. So they ended up bailing on that one. But there was a whole bunch of these experiments, but then Herb Terrace comes in and he's like, no, all this is fake. None of this is happening. And he got himself a chimp and was just essentially trying to prove that it's nonsense. When they're talking, it's not a thought, it's nonsense. It's like they know symbols that they can do with their hand, but there's nothing more to it.
They're just doing a stream of just random symbols that you've taught them, and they're hoping that the combination that they do it in will get them what they want, which is, a treat or praise or a toy or something like that. And at first, I'm like, oh, come on, you're just trying to poop on everyone's parade. This is awesome. And then they actually started explaining it, and they actually had the audio of some of the stuff that Penny had done with Mr. Rogers and stuff like that. And it did almost seem like, okay, this gorilla is just like sign languaging just random stuff. And she's like, oh yeah, she means this when she says this.
The fact that there was like a translator there that was explaining what she actually meant makes it seem fishier. But at the same time, she was able to be like, I think with Mr. Rogers, she's like talking about his cufflinks, but she knows that he had cufflinks on. So it's one of those things where they were so focused on what exactly they wanted to prove. They wanted to prove that Coco could have a conversation with you, mm-hmm. that they could it was thinking like a human, and it wasn't necessarily doing that. But then there was a level of communication there that was proven by all of this that was pretty crazy, even once you know all of this.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. And they talk a lot about sign language in general in this podcast. There's so many layers to the show that we can't even really get into. They talk about eugenics and the people that started all of this kind of stuff and crazy things that they thought and horrible things that they said. And basically, and it was funny because this show is notorious for like ruining something for you. You know, it's like, oh, great. Now you're going to ruin Coco for us? So like, no. We're not going to ruin Coco. We're just going to ruin all of the humans around Coco,
and that really is the effect. That really is what happens.
Coco's awesome.
Coco's amazing.
But everyone around her, I did like Penny. I will say that. I think Penny had a great.
I think Penny cared too much, I think is the problem.
Okay. I could give you that.
Because, okay, in the end, she was sued for the nipple stuff too. Because apparently she would come in and be like, "Oh, Coco's tired of seeing my nipples. How about I'll turn around, you show her your nipples." It's like, that's a weird thing to do. And then like they're all like, she also was so focused on trying to make it like one way that she almost like ruined her own research. You know what I mean?
Well, they talked about that, and I will say that's the one of the big issues with this kind of research is, and they even talk. It's a dichotomy to get a gorilla to be trained and do these kind of things in general. You have to have a very strong bond and relationship with it. To be a scientist and to get data from a gorilla, you cannot have that strong of a bond and that kind of a relationship with an animal. So it's like this, I don't know, it's this.
Yeah, it's really tough because also Herb Terrace, it was later found out that he they said he literally let his chimp's name was Nim. They let Nim smoke weed. They let Nim drink. And then Nim just stayed in a cage all day and was handled by 60 different volunteers is what he says.
Sounds horrible.
And so like, it wasn't something where he was bonded to any of them. So if that theory is true, where they have to be closely bonded to someone to really communicate, Nim was never closely bonded enough to communicate. So It's like, it's all over the place. But then then you get to kind of the thing that ruins the people of it is all of them kind of mismanaged this to the point where it's just kind of bad for the animals. Like there was all that weird stuff about Penny, like the zoo wanted Coco back and then she resisted. And like, there was all that. Nim, Herb Terrace's chimp ended up going to like a roadside zoo.
Yeah. And they said like Tiger King style. Like
honestly, all of this kind of reminds me of Tiger King a little bit. Like it's a little,
which is not a good thing.
It is very not a good thing. I have decided because of that show, if anybody really loves tigers to the point where they like want to like own a tiger, I don't want to be around them too much.
We made the decision when we were watching. We're like, the more you like tigers, the more crazy you are, it seems.
Yeah. It does, like, okay, because don't get me wrong, tigers are amazing animals.
Or
gorillas
big
are
cats
amazing
in
animals.
General.
Yeah, no, but I don't want them to be at my house. I don't want one. I don't want to, like, I mean, I guess, no, I don't want to pet one after seeing that show, and that's how they, like, abuse them, and that's part of the whole, I don't want to pet one. So, like, if you are really into tigers that much, it feels like you're going to be on Tiger King, and that's not good.
Now, I do have a question. Like, I'm curious, and I will fully admit that we may be walking into a little bit of controversial territory. What do you feel about having animals in captivity? Like,
it's tough,
like a zoo or
no, and I get why people don't like zoos. You know, I understand it. I do understand it. Because in the end, the optimal place for them to be is in their natural habitat. But then there are some animals that literally are only not extinct because of the conservation efforts of zoos.
Mm-hmm.
And there's breeding programs in zoos that have helped maintain species. And there's ways that zoos can do as much as they can. And a lot of times those are rescues at zoos. It's not like they went out to the wild and trapped a tiger and brought it over here. As we saw in Tiger King, there's thousands of people just selling tigers around. There is more tigers.
I had no clue how many random tigers were just like all over the U.S.
There is a crazy amount more tigers in the United States than there are in the wild, and not at zoos, in like random people's yards. You know what I mean? So it's not like something where every zoo is doing some weird procedure to try and get these animals. So a lot of times it's rescues. But yeah, obviously, optimally, they'd be in the wild, and we wouldn't destroy their habitat, and they could live and be an animal like they should be.
I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of where you are. Like, I understand why people don't think that animals should be. I think that there should be a very deliberate effort to make sure that the habitat that you're making in the zoo is as close to a habitat that it would be like in the wild as possible. But like a lot of these animals, they live longer in captivity, and they're not wild anymore. They're being fed and stuff like that. I don't know. I've always had this weird. I feel torn in this thought process because I've thought about both sides as well. And I don't know where I stand, to be honest. I love zoos. I like going to the zoo, but I also like animals, and I think they belong in the wild. You know
I'll say this. There's definitely like there's differences, because roadside zoos are also like, that's what I'm saying is I feel like it's more of a nuanced issue than just like zoo or no zoo, because if you watch Tiger King, they call themselves a zoo.
Nope.
That is not a zoo.
That's not what I mean.
Not a zoo. We're talking about an actual zoo with an enclosure and them having like activity and stuff. And like I said, I would prefer them to be like a rescued animal that needs somewhere to go, or like a conservation effort. But obviously, in the end, a nature preserve or some kind of a sanctuary would be better, because then you take out it's monetized. You're literally just doing it to save the animals. Because I think that there's even if I remember correctly, there's a gigantic elephant sanctuary in Florida, but you can't go.
Really?
You can't go. It's not like a thing like that. They just have a ton of land, and they essentially take in like retired circus elephants. Although we should be nearing the end of where that's even a thing. Elephants live for a really long time.
It's
done. But
the circus is over. I did watch it right near the end. It was definitely a lot different than what I remember when I was a kid. I mean, it blew my mind as a kid, like it really did. And I just feel like it's the world's different now. Everyone's not. There's YouTube. It's like,
no, there is that. You don't have to, like, your first experience seeing an elephant doesn't have to be like in person. You can see that on YouTube, and you can watch them in their natural habitat. But yeah, no, it's this crazy thing because Coco, all of it was super interesting. They were trying to prove that she could talk, but what they ended up proving was she could communicate on a level that was much more sophisticated than what was assumed. But because of the work that Herb Terrace did, it basically shut down all of this. It shut down all of the research, like all of the money, all of the opportunity, just shut it down. Which honestly, it doesn't sound like any of them were in like a prime condition because
even Penny, it didn't sound like was like
it's not great.
Coco was in a great scenario.
What did they call that show on Discovery? There was one about like dangerous pets. You know what I mean? I can't remember what it was called.
I don't know about that.
It might have been something like that. Was it Fatal Attractions?
Sounds like that sounds like a Discovery Channel.
It would be a great show if that's not the title. But the problem with apes and the problem with Herb Terrace's ape is they bond, but then once they get to a certain age, they become extremely violent and territorial. Like Herb's chimp was apparently mauling all of the people that were coming in there, so they had to send it to the roadside zoo or whatever.
I heard chimps are like very dangerous. Like
chimps are like 4 times stronger than humans. Yeah, chimps are like 4 times stronger than we are because they're like bulk muscle.
All muscle.
Yeah,
it's just all muscle.
Pure strength, no dexterity, really. We have like fine motor dexterity and stuff like that, but theirs is strength. So yeah, it's not a great idea to have a wild animal that should be in the wild in your house or around a bunch of people all the time. So there was this whole layer of everything they were talking about. All of this was kind of like the shine on this rotten apple. Underneath everything was kind of this layer of like, it kind of makes me not feel great. Even though like Coco, what she was like doing and everything was, because she was super gentle. You can see like the videos of her like just petting her kitten and stuff like that.
Oh, that's so cute. I mean, I never even saw gentle. That. But to think about a gorilla with a little kitten, it makes my heart get bigger.
Yeah, thinking about it. She was super gentle. And it was like, even with her, with Robin Williams, like you're looking at a very, very large animal that was just very gentle and very like a sweet animal. But there was also like the humans interacting in a way where they shouldn't have been. But all of this is because of the crazy story that these people on You're Wrong About told. Because I was not expecting to understand this depth of what was happening, learn about ape research and learn about all of the subtext on this stuff, because it was something that I knew who Coco was, but I didn't know any of this. And so it was crazy to kind of go through this journey with them putting this story out. You can tell they're writers because they do like reveal it in a way that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, they talked about women in science. They talked about eugenics and like racist
we didn't even get into the sign language
stuff at the beginning, and sign language stuff, like the whole layer of like. And I listened to a podcast. I think it was 99% Invisible podcast about sign language, and that story is nuts. Like it's crazy. They treated people horrible
There's a crazy story about like just sign language, but you know what? Let's leave that one. Check out their show. It's great. Because seriously, there is so much more to like sign language and this show than you would ever have thought. I'm surprised. I wonder if they've done a standalone on just sign language.
Probably, because it is a crazy story. Who did they talk about? They talked about some, I think, politician or famous person that was like very much against people learning sign language, and they would like tie kids' hands behind their backs and stuff so they couldn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff with the sign language. Man. I never would have guessed that there would be, but there is.
Well, all right. No, it was a great recommendation. Great show. So much to talk about. I mean, like so many things.
Yeah, there was
more than we could ever even think about touching. But that's what we love. Is we love to find a show that makes you think, and it made us think about a lot of different things, and including like where we stand on certain things, like, zoos and stuff like that. Because I was thinking about that while listening to this. I'm like, what do I think about that? Because I don't really know if I've given a lot of thought about it. I love going to the zoo, but I really hate Tiger King. Just like, so
that is not a zoo. That does not count.
So that brings us to this week's recommendation. And I've got one, and we actually found them we did a small ad campaign, and we were looking for other podcasts that kind of seemed in line with us to do an ad for us. And they reached out to us and they did an ad for us. And it's called The Fantastic History of Food. And their short episodes are like 15 minutes to 20 minutes long. So I'm going to recommend two.
Nice.
The two that I'm going to recommend is 3 Tales of Cheese, from Egyptian mummies to Uraguayan cannonballs. And episode 19, Tomatoes Were Blamed for Witchcraft and Werewolves.
Oh, nice.
It's a mix of like history but it's always like based in food, and it's great. And the one about the cheese, there's a discovery in there that I actually had as a discovery that I was going to bring on the other Discovery show, and I have it on my list, but I'm not going to bring it now because now we'll be talking about it.
Yeah,
it was a good one. They have some really cool episodes. They have ones about, the newest one is Al Capone once ran a soup kitchen, which I did know about that. The world's most dangerous and illegal cheese. When drinking coffee could get you decapitated. By the way, I listened to this series. I had no idea that coffee was basically thought to be like a drug for a long time. Like even in the US, but mainly before that, there was like alcohol was legal and coffee was illegal.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
It is. It's crazy. I don't know, but so listen to The Fantastic History of Food, and we will talk about that one next week. And remember,
there's always more to discover.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Discovery Show. We would love for you to get in touch. We have a Facebook group called the Podcast Discovery Club, and our Twitter is @the PDS Official. We also record the show live every Friday night at 8 o'clock on Twitch. We would love for you to be part of the show while we're recording it.
If you want to support the show, we have a number of ways you can do that. From our Patreon to our affiliate links, they're always linked in the show notes. In the end, you support the show just by listening, and it means the world to us. So thank you so much for being a part of our journey.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.